Good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night, so that means I'm welcoming you to another episode of Chaz Calenda, attorney at law here on the Coalition Radio Network. I'm your host, Chaz Calenda, attorney at the law firm of Inman and Torgy in Coventry, Rhode Island, also a candidate for Attorney General in 2022. And as usual, I'll be walking us through the subject matter tonight, and most importantly, I'll be putting the law above the politics every time we talk. We're continuing this series where we touch upon various legal issues facing us here in the state of Rhode Island and nationally. Tonight, we're going to discuss some of the pending gun legislation being supported by all of Rhode Island's general officers, particularly Attorney General Peter Nerona, government transparency, and some of the optics of the bizarre rally held yesterday by politicians at the State House, where they tried to sell us all on, quote, common sense gun reform. To help me discuss all these issues and the inevitable follow-up questions and topics that come up, here is Coalition Radio host Pat Ford, and joining us later, hopefully, Brenda Jacobs, Second Amendment community advocate. Pat, thank you for joining me at the show.
No, I'm follow-up questions are my thing. They're my jam.
I kind of got that from you watching you.
I ask questions. That's what we do here at the Coalition. We ask questions and we expect answers. You know, it's a pretty simple, social calculation. I think it's been observed for hundreds of thousands of years, except in Rhode Island, right? That's
right.
You don't need no stinking answers in Rhode Island.
I think
You summed it up pretty well though when you talk about that bizarre event yesterday. Please. Hold forth.
Pat, I happened to watch an astute reporter, a journalist, asking our esteemed Attorney General about some of the common, quote unquote, common sense gun reform legislation that he's out there promoting as the Attorney General. He's telling us, and the way I heard it was, he's having trouble prosecuting the rampant gun crime because he doesn't have the tools in his toolbox, i.e., doesn't have the laws on the books that allows him to effectively prosecute these gun crimes. And I think the journalist that wanted a few explanations about that asked him, which tools are you looking for? Which ones would help stop the shootings, and which ones would help force the criminals who are using these guns, these illegal guns that are already illegal, by the way, which ones would help them follow the law? And I saw Attorney General Peter Nerona get a little bit annoyed by being asked that question because it didn't seem to fit the political narrative that was being spun yesterday. What do you think?
Here's my frustration. First of all, I don't appreciate being spoken down to. I just don't. The body language, the words he chose to use, he sought to not only diminish me, and I am a voice for a group of people. I represent, if you will, at that moment in time, the folks who take the time to read our website and to watch us there, as well as, you talk about common sense. How many parties, how many cookouts, how many club events, how many political events, how many conversations you had over the last, I don't know how many years, where Rhode Islanders continually ask one simple question: why don't they enforce the laws that are on the books already? I think that's all I asked, and I think I spoke for a lot of folks. And the way, again, that he was so dismissive, so petulant, the look on his face, it was all twisted up. I don't know what to say to the gentleman. We have a right to ask certain questions. And the other question that I'm concerned about is what happens when we pass these laws and nothing changes? Because, it's a mainstay. It's almost a cliche. Yes, I get that it's conventional wisdom, but by and large, the people who will obey these laws are the folks who will obey all the laws. And the folks who are intent on violent crime will continue to be intent on violent crime. And so there's no there. It's a nothing burger, these laws. They're not common sense at all, are they?
No, they're not common sense, and it's disingenuous for the attorney general to stand there and say that these laws are needed for him in order to enforce the laws that are already on the books. These additional laws, I should say, because Rhode Island has, as you probably know, Pat, Rhode Island has some of the most draconian criminal laws relating to gun crime of all the 50 states in the United States. So when I think one of the follow-ups, one of the responses, the snarky responses that the attorney general gave you when you asked that question, is this going to stop criminals from breaking the law? He kind of dismissed it and said, well, of course, I reject that out of hand because, our office is prosecuting and enforcing the laws already. I'm prosecuting somebody who shot 22 bullets through a car, and he's got 10 years to serve. So didn't he just make your point that they've already got the tools? Because I think 10 years in prison for shooting 22 bullets is certainly not a slap on the wrist. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I've been doing this for 15 years, criminal law for 15 years, and 10 years in prison to serve is certainly no slap on the wrist. So I'm not sure what he's referring to, because I can tell you there are at least 5 or 6 statutes that already exist that if you discharge a firearm, legal or not, the firearm, if you discharge a firearm and you don't even injure anybody, never mind that you're going to get a felony assault charge, you're going to get hit with discharging a firearm during a crime of violence. You know what that carries, Pat? That carries 10 years consecutive to whatever you get on the original felony assault charge. If you injure somebody, that carries 20 years consecutive to whatever you get on the actual felony assault charge. If you kill somebody, you get a mandatory consecutive life sentence. Mandatory. That means the judge has no discretion. You get that mandatory consecutive sentence. So Peter Noronha was being, as usual, in my opinion, completely disingenuous when he answered I wouldn't call them answers, but when he snarkily responded to your inquisitive questions.
Well, and my other concern is, quite frankly, is the use of plea bargaining. And you and I have spoken about this before in the air, and you've had some pretty, fairly intense conversations with a number of attorneys about the plea bargaining process. I guess what I don't understand, and by the way, let me make it very clear. Victimless crimes should not be accorded jail time. In fact, victimless crimes should cease being crimes. So on one respect, I'm not going to be the guy who says, we need to put, 3 strikes you're out. That's proven to be a fiasco. I'm not the guy who says get caught with weed and, and you're going to the ACI. No. In fact, quite frankly, I believe in the legalization of drugs. But on the other extreme, when violence is perpetrated and proof beyond a shadow of a doubt, then part of me is saying, Chas, for a crime that he so dramatically described and repeated, I gotta say, 10 years doesn't sound like a lot of time, particularly if there's good time and there's parole. It's almost like he wants the best of both worlds. He wants to put up the front that he's tough on, crime and guns, but they equivocate a lot. He refused to discuss with me the notion of plea bargaining. He was outright dismissive. Yet, again, I think those are questions Rhode Islanders want answered. And isn't it time that...
I would agree, yeah.
I mean, all I'm doing is channeling, common sense. So why won't he answer the questions? Talk to me.
Well, he's not going to answer the questions about how the laws are going to make the criminals obey them anymore, because he knows they're not. That's a political stunt on his part. But as far as the plea bargaining, I think you and I had this discussion a couple of times, and I've talked about, like you mentioned, I talked about it with some other attorneys. Plea bargaining, unfortunately, is a part of the criminal justice system. And if it wasn't, our criminal justice system would grind to a halt, because I would estimate, and I think studies would back this up, that plea bargaining, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to agree with Peter Noronha on this particular point, not the entire thing, but on this particular point, that Plea bargaining resolves probably about 90 to 90% of the cases that come before the criminal justice system. But the plea bargaining in Rhode Island, particularly with these gun charges, where they're adding on the discharging of a firearm resulting in injury, or discharging resulting in death, or discharging that didn't result in injury, you just fired a gun at somebody, or you had a possession of an illegal firearm without a carry license. The people, the reason why people don't go to jail on those charges is, yes, because of a plea bargain, but it's also because the attorney general, who has the sole authority to bring those charges, dismiss those charges, or amend those charges, are choosing to do so in many of those cases to resolve those cases. And that's not always in the best interest. So a plea bargain in and of itself, I would argue, is not a bad thing per se. But when you start reducing the charges or dismissing the charges which carry the most weight, which is the tools that the attorney general claims he's missing, like the discharging the firearm and injuring people with the firearm, when they start dismissing those and going with the underlying charge, just the simple, the assault charge, and instead of going for the full full sentencing, that's where your question becomes exceptionally relevant. Why does that happen so often?
Well, and my concern is this: if I get how there are a variety of issues at stake, the strength of the state's case, in a very real sense, versus, say, for example, the seriousness of the charges, jury trial, non-jury. I mean, there are all sorts of vagaries which I can't even begin to comprehend, because, as we always say, every time I'm on your show, I'm not an expert. I just play one on the radio. But but at the same time, if you're looking to score points off of creating additional laws, but you, on a very simplistic level, you don't utilize to his words, the toolkit that you've already been handed, then that tells me that you're doing nothing but virtue signaling. You're doing nothing but appealing to a political sentiment, as opposed to actually performing your job in the spirit of the law. And if you've got an opportunity just to charge someone who's been accused of and proven to be guilty of a violent crime, bodily injury, death resulting, any of that, then those are the folks that need long-term rehabilitation. They need a prison, if you will, a prison facilities and an institution that will actually work to resolve these issues with them or make them better people. But at the same time, what's the point if you of more laws if you simply won't utilize what you've been given? I don't get it.
No, you nailed it right on the head, Pat. You hit it right on the head. Is that yesterday was all about virtue signaling, and this is why it's from my perspective, it's especially distressing coming from an officer like the Attorney General, who's supposed to be the top law enforcement official for the state of Rhode Island. He's not out there making the laws. He's not out there creating the policy. The General Assembly is. The governor is. The Attorney General is supposed to be, in my opinion, an apolitical, fair, and equal prosecutor, attorney for the people of the state of Rhode Island, and in many cases, attorney for elements of the government within the state of Rhode Island. And for him to be out there, knowingly and disingenuously talking about how he's lacking the tools, when he knows very well that those add-on charges that carry the biggest weight when these violent crimes routinely get dismissed by his office, because they're the ones with the exclusive jurisdiction over whether that happens or not, then it's really just a political rally, which is what we saw yesterday with all our 5 general officers of the state of Rhode Island.
Now, you and I discussed this offline a little bit, and I posited the notion of open meetings to him and the legitimacy of essentially using political theater to, again, these there's this chasing of windmills to get more laws on the books that won't be enforced, all of that. But talk to me about the appropriateness of having the 5, if you will, executive officers of the state of Rhode Island on a stage in what was originally intended to be a closed environment, purposely held for to be held after the State House was closed to everyone, announced the day before, and I don't know how they found out, but you had folks who are on the other side, if you will, the people who believe in the spirit of the Constitution, who believe in the natural law of the right to engage in one's self-defense by any means necessary. Speak to me about what type of integrity is involved when someone sets up a political stunt like this to create the image that it's the entire state supporting these laws, that there's a good degree of unanimity. And I guess the best term would be uses the imprimatur of the state of Rhode Island behind their own personal choice in legislation.
I mean, if you're asking me about the integrity of doing something like that, I would tell you there's none. That was a show for the sole purpose of showing, look at us, we are united. We, the elected officials of the state of Rhode Island and most of your General Assembly members, we are all here to tell you that we support these quote unquote common sense gun laws. And we weren't even gonna allow people with opposing viewpoints to even know about it, never mind talk. Thank God there are some advocates that did their research and found out about this, because as you mentioned, this was going to be after the State House closed originally. This was going to be so nobody could get into the building unless you were invited. Now, you had asked me about whether or not this could implicate the Open Meetings Act, and probably by the strict definition of what constitutes a public body under the Open Meetings Act. And again, I'm going by the Attorney General's guidance that they publish every year, because they're the ones who enforce the Open Meeting Act rules. They're probably not a public body in the sense that they're the ones making or acting upon a matter which the public body has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. But that's the purpose of the Open Meetings Act, is that it's the convening of a public body to discuss and or act upon a matter over which the public body has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. Now, doesn't the governor play a role in what laws get passed? I believe the General Assembly has to pass a bill and the governor signs it into law, if that's how it works. If the last time I took a civics class, at least that's how it worked. So I would suggest that there is some advisory or supervision or control or jurisdiction in what laws were being discussed, because that's part of the wording, discussed or acted upon, or what bills are being discussed or acted upon. So, I mean, I think that a smart OMA lawyer would be able to potentially make a complaint and say, hey, listen, this was a political rally at a time where it wasn't purely political. This was a public body by public officers getting together to discuss potential bills which they have jurisdiction and at least control over. So it's clearly they did not want to have any transparency in this process. They did not want to have any dissent shown. They did not want to have any cracks in their so-called unity, as you put it, their show of unity amongst this. Because if they did, this would have been a debate that they would have invited both sides of the aisle to discuss.
Right. And I'll use the word facade, because what was fascinating was twofold. Who was there and who wasn't there? Now, after a extended period of time when one could argue that you had three politicians seemingly co-joined at the hip, Mr. Ruggiero, Mr. Shekarchi, and of course the governor, literally every act of legislation, there was a formal bill signing, and with a great ceremony, often held on the State House steps, where the platitudes and the, I'll just say this, it got pretty thick out there, if you know what I mean. Notable by their absence was, in fact, yesterday, Mr. Ruggiero and Mr. Shekarchi. And one has to question whether that there are cracks in that facade, whether there are flaws and that yesterday was an attempt to create what we call here at the coalition an era of inevitability, and the alleged flummox, if you will, about the bills that were about to be signed and passed, all except that they weren't. I don't believe that. Well, let's just say the conspiracy theorist in me, 10% of me is saying, did the governor say that just as to create that air of inevitability or not? And so they weren't there. Equally compelling was that the sponsor of said legislation refused to comment on whether or not they had the votes. And a couple members of the media, including one loud, obnoxious one up front, yelled after her, "Do you have the votes? Do you have the votes?" If they had the votes, I will tell you this, it would have been passed already. They don't have the votes.
I would think they would have passed it.
Right, because in a season where bill after bill after bill is being fast-tracked through your House of Representatives up at the aforementioned Halitosis Hall, you know, all of a sudden, this one is provocative by the fact that they haven't been passed. So one wonders if Mr. Shikarchi and Mr. Ruggiero have reached their limit for progressive legislation and or have decided that enough is enough, because ultimately they have to go back for re-election. And as we found out in the case of one Mr. Nicholas Mattiello, there is no such thing as a guarantee in terms of re-election anywhere, because in the corner of my eye, in the back of the room, and she hasn't joined us yet, we're hoping Brenda Jacob can join us tonight, there is a rather significant group of people who, at this point, are tad peeved, perhaps a little verklempt at the quote-unquote inevitability of, air quotes, common sense legislation, who've had enough. And by the way, have been a pretty provocative presence on the electoral landscape of the state of Rhode Island for a generation now. And they're not sitting idly by. And if you haven't heard, tomorrow afternoon there's going to be a garden party, all right? Right on, again, on the lawn, if you will, the graciously manicured lawns of one Halitosis Hall, where, folks, we will be sipping iced tea and having sandwiches, as in, Attorney General, get me a sandwich. All right? I've wanted to say that for a long time. Now, we've largely avoided the elephant in the room here, is that, of course, your candidacy for the Attorney General's office. I know, are you planning on trying to make it towards the end of the day? I know you have some court appointments, and you've got a legal practice where people are literally depending on you, in some cases for their lives, literally. Are you going to be able to try and make it tomorrow, or what are your thoughts?
I am going to do everything in my power to get there as soon as I'm finished at work, because I think it's too important. Whether or not they're just trying to create the air of inevitability as you said, or they are truly planning to pass any of this legislation, I think we need to have our voices heard. And I say I'm talking about people who believe in the Second Amendment, people who believe in rights that we have under both the state and federal constitutions, and protecting those rights from, as Peter Noronha put it, our republic, our constitutional republic, where we just send people up there to speak for us, and they vote how they vote, and oh well if you don't like it.
Yeah, there was that was kind of a shot across the bow. If I can quote one of the great figures in legal jurisprudence, in the annals of if you will, of criminal justice. Of course, I'm talking about Judge Smale. We all remember him as one of the protagonists in Caddyshack. And I believe the quote is, "You'll get nothing and you'll like it."
Great movie. Love that movie.
And to me, right now, if we had an opportunity to put Judge Smales on the bench in our state, I'd support that at this point, because as Rodney Dangerfield famously said, "Hey, it looks good on you." Wait, we have someone who is joining us through the miracle of IP addresses and telephony and a lot of smart people. I think Brenda Jacob. Brenda, are you on the air? In fact, have you joined us, if you will, not only in spirit but in presence?
I think so. It's been a long day.
Yeah, it's been a long life. Yikes. Brenda, great to see you again. You know, it's funny, we ran into each other just yesterday, if you will, on the verdant lawns of Halitosis Hall. You weighed in at the time, but now with a day's reflection, a moment to pause, to focus, if you will, on the nature of yesterday's events, give us your opinion. What do you think?
Well, I still can't believe that so many decisions are being made on false information, and I still can't believe that their basis of the false information is from an actual advocacy or supposed advocacy group that makes up their own numbers, their own polls, their own information. Like I just can't even believe that that's how our legislators are legislating without concrete information.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've got some concerns over information that has been provided or not provided, if you will, by said Attorney General's office. Now, Chaz, if I could jump to you for a second. Chaz, and again, I'm not trying to be silly when I ask these questions. I mean, they're in a sense they're rhetorical in nature, but I'm not sure if everyone understands this. And listen, I learn a lot. Every time Chaz comes on the air, I learn a lot. Every time Brenda comes on the air, I learn a lot. So I pretend not to have all the answers. Chaz, what is the nature of the relationship between the Attorney General of the state of Rhode Island and or its citizenry? What is the true legal nature?
The true legal nature is that the Attorney General represents all Rhode Islanders as the people's attorney. He also has a role to represent certain governmental agencies and certain suits that may be brought against officers or agencies of the government. But his role is an independent constitutional role. He's elected and he does not report to the governor. He does not report to he does not report to the General Assembly. He does not report to any other office. So he has the authority, and I believe he has the moral and legal responsibility to make sure that any laws that are being enforced against its citizenry, the state of Rhode Island, or laws that are being imposed, pass constitutional muster and make sure that they are in the best interest of the people of Rhode Island.
So with that as a backdrop, Brenda, what do you believe that the Attorney General's office should be providing your organization in terms of information and or support?
Well, first of all, I don't believe that he should be up there pandering to lobbyists that have an agenda that's directly against our constitutional rights. That's number one. And number two is I feel like he should be providing the data that, the criminal data that legislature needs in order to make educated decisions up there. I really feel like it's a conflict of interest for him being up there with the lobbyists. I can't see how that's right or fair to all Rhode Islanders, and I do have a question that came up.
It's definitely not Brenda.
I have a question for you too. Yesterday, he said during the press conference that he cannot prosecute the person who bought the 89 guns for the straw purchase because there's no laws on the book for him to prosecute that. Isn't that what he said, Pat?
I didn't actually.
Yeah, no, that's, he needed these laws because he needed to prosecute.
He can't prosecute people because the existing criminals, because these laws don't exist.
If Peter Noronha said that, I didn't actually catch that part of it, but if Peter Noronha said that, then he has been coasting by the seat of his pants for the last, probably 12 to 15 years as both the U.S. Attorney and the Rhode Island Attorney General, because 114735 right there indicates who is eligible and who is not eligible to purchase guns, and it's absolutely prosecutable under state law if you make a straw purchase for someone that is ineligible to possess that gun. And Peter Nerona, as a former U.S. attorney under President Obama, certainly knows that straw purchases are illegal under federal law, under multiple sections of federal law, 18 U.S.C. 922. And if he does not know that, I have some serious questions about his
You're gonna
competency
have
to
to
be the
watch the
chief law
video.
enforcement officer.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you'll
well,
have to watch it because that's what he alluded to. He alluded that he needed these laws so that he could prosecute criminals because he can't prosecute criminals without these laws. And I'm sitting there like I know how many laws are in 1147, and I can think of a myriad of of infractions that they could be charged with, and I'm not even an attorney, and I don't even know that much about law, but I certainly know that he could be prosecuting these criminals a lot more effectively. It's just that they are, they're so easy on them and they're plea bargaining them out. So what the heck? Why not do 10 repeat crimes? If we get away with the first 9, you know, I just have a problem with that. And going back to what you said about him working for the people, well, clearly he doesn't like it when the people ask questions because he got a little flustered at the end when we were asking what, Pat was asking what I thought were legitimate questions, and why he got so ruffled by legitimate questions means that we're commoners, we're beneath him, and he feels no need to answer our questions. And that's
And
exactly his little
yeah.
stint at the end is how it made me feel as a citizen.
It was a hissy fit, and I will absolutely say that he feels like he does not have to answer those questions because he in his mind, I'm going to go on a limb and say that he feels secure enough in the way that Rhode Island generally votes that he is not really truly accountable to the voters of the state. So he's going to go out there and answer the questions he feels like answering and basically swat away the annoying reporter who asks legitimate questions like he's a little gnat. And then not to be not to diminish your questions, Pat, because your questions were perfectly legitimate and they could have been easily answered if he wanted to give an honest answer. But he's not there to give an honest answer. He was there to give a political answer and create that air of inevitability, like you were referring to earlier, Pat.
His grandstanding. That's what that was about.
And I absolutely believe it was a conflict of interest. I actually think it is a conflict of interest for the attorney general to be standing there with lobbyist groups, lobbyist groups and politicians, and giving them support. Yes, it's a partisan elected office because that's the way it's done in Rhode Island. But when you get into that office and you're going through the law and you're engaging in law enforcement, partisan politics are not something that you should be considering when you're enforcing the law. And why are you up there, giving some air of legitimacy to groups like lobbyist groups, whether you agree with them or not? You may have to prosecute people in that. You may have to go after, you may have to take action that they may not like. And now you're up there and you look like you're a supporter of them. It creates
right.
at least an air of, this is something stinks, something's rotten. And all of us who have been from Rhode Island our entire lives, this is not something that is new to us. This is not something, unfortunately, that is just come onto the scene. We've been going through 80 years of this. I'd say it's time for something different at this point.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But I just can't believe that that's how our legislators are working up there. That's my biggest takeaway yesterday is that the misinformation that is being spread. So we've been on a little sign campaign. So we've been working on some signage that's going to rebut a lot of yesterday's lies. So
It's good to
so
hear
we've
that.
been having some fun with it.
Yeah, I think the transparency is the most important part that we've got to deal with here, and I'm glad you guys are doing that.
Well, and the transparency about the whole meeting was an issue, and that's why I went on I went on John DePietro's show, I went on Matt Allen's show, and I started squawking about it. I'm like, wait a minute. So I want to have a rally, and I got told I'm not allowed in the building. I'm not allowed to have a power cord. We're not allowed to use the bathrooms. And then we find out about the sneaky secret press release, and they've invited all the lobbyists into the state house, rolled out the red carpet, called up the press for them, and they having that there hours after the State House is supposedly closed. Like, wait a minute. So, that's why I really started chirping about that, and it got people calling. And I know it struck a nerve because when the governor started his speech, he said, we're coming outside so we can be more transparent. Like, yeah, right.
Oh,
Where'd you
isn't
get
that
that
nice of
idea?
him? It wasn't that
And where
nice
did
of
you
him.
get that idea from? No,
Yeah.
you got called out. That's the problem. You got called out on that. And you know something, Pat? I watched some of the video, and they walked back in the building afterwards too.
Oh yeah.
And
No,
that building to be.
no, it's hypocrisy was on full display yesterday. It's
Yep.
to a degree that is excessive, even by, as we like to call it, halitosis hall standards. By the way, when I have to always say, always a disclaimer every show, when I use the term halitosis hall, I did not come without that. The master of Rhode Island political economy, one Rudy Cheeks, one of the protagonists of the tag team of Philippe and Jorge, which I believe is still running on Motif. He was the one who invented halitosis hall. Of course, he was also the one who renamed Ed DePreet as Baby Gerber. So, one must salute comic genius when one can. And Rudy's out there working it still, and God bless Rudy Cheeks. Tomorrow is a big day, isn't it? Funny how this all worked out.
Yeah.
What's up for tomorrow? Anything going on?
Well, we're lining up with, some speakers. We have a nice rally planned. It looks like the weather's going to hold out and be beautiful for us. So I'm excited about that. We're going to get there around 3:00, and we're going to start speakers around 4:00. And we have a lot of gun owners, and they're just happy that we're going to be up there and that they want to be seen. A lot of them are kind of quiet, so they don't normally speak, but they like to be seen in their yellow shirts up there. So that's what we're doing, is providing the opportunity so that they can feel like their voices are being heard. Because right now, this past year, they don't feel like they're being listened to and they're being heard. So it's going to give them a good opportunity to go up there and be seen and heard.
And the show that you folks have put on over a number of years has been breathtaking. And it didn't happen last year because obviously, in fact, I believe it was literally just days before, a handful of days, maybe even just one or two, maybe even that day, when Rally Day was supposed to occur at the State House, and it didn't because of the coronavirus. I mean, it was
Right.
literally on the brink.
Yep. Yeah, I think it was 2 days before that we had to end up canceling it because everything's just started to shut down at that point.
Right. Give us the logistics, times, how this is going to work tomorrow. Just give the layout here so that we can share this. And you guys have done an amazing job of, if you will, beating the streets, getting people aware. But let's take an opportunity to lay out the logistics for tomorrow, the times, the dates, the places, all the good stuff.
Yep. So at 3:00 is when it's going to start. People can start gathering. They'll be parking at Providence Place Mall and various parking lots around the State House. And then at 4:00, we're going to have speakers. But if you come after work, the employee parking lots are open for free. So you'll be able to park in those lots as well. We're going to keep it, quiet and peaceful. We're going to stand out there with our signs. And then I probably have about 16 speakers lined up that are going to talk about various things from women issues to conservation and environment. And, so we have a nice veterans, things that we do for the community, businesses, small businesses. So we've got a nice lineup to kind of educate people who might not know us about all the benefits that we bring to the state of Rhode Island, and as well as refuting a lot of the lies and misinformation that is spread about us by the antis.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll probably just, continue our speakers. The only reason we're keeping it going till 7 is because, a lot of people work and they really want to be up there. And even if they don't have the opportunity to see a speaker or be a speaker, they just want to go there and make sure that they can be part of it too. So that's why it's going from 4 to 7.
If there's a hallmark of 2021, and clearly the hallmark, if you will, of 2020 was the coronavirus, the 2021 is the continued suppression of our civil liberties with respect to our ability to testify in front of and in at length of our elected officials. Despite the fact that largely everything in America is open now, thank God, the state government continues to hide behind, if you will, the beard that is the coronavirus. Schools can be in place. We're all back to work. Thank goodness. We all had to maintain our responsibilities throughout this dread period. When in fact state government didn't take a pay cut, but they certainly took some time off. How important is it, given the fact that A, God forbid we should actually be able to vote on this issue, B, God forbid we should actually be able to testify at length in front of them, that C, that people, particularly this year, show up? How clear and present is the danger to someone's personal liberties?
Well, because of the influx of the progressives that got voted in the last election, it's very important, because if these bills make it into committee, they have an excellent chance of making it to the floor. In fact, I would guarantee that some of them would make it to the floor. And if they make it to the floor, then there's 100% chance that they'll all be passed, because they have the votes in both the House and the Senate to pass all of these bills.
Right. So we were talking.
That's why I think they're pushing so hard, because they know they have an unfair playing field right now, and that's why they're pulling out every deceitful tactic in the book to get those bills into committee so they can rush them to the floor. And we know that they've also been begging to bypass committee and bring them straight to the floor, because they keep saying they have enough votes on the floor to vote them in, and they want to bypass committee. So they're even trying to change the rules behind the scenes in order to get these bills on the floor. So, when I'm talking to people, you got to rally like your rights depend on it, because they absolutely do. This may be our only chance to stop this, and to really show people that we're not a minority. They keep claiming they're 70% with their 600 people poll. I need thousands of people up there. And we need to have a strong showing and let them know that we're not, we trump their 600 people, no pun intended.
Oh, there you go. Chess, we haven't spoken about it much because we've really been focusing for the last few months on the on the real substance of the law, but we have to break this into a political conversation, mainly because, they went first. The Attorney General decided to politicize his office yesterday. How would Chas Calenda, if AG, would he handle situations like this where you had significant lobbying groups, heavily invested with out-of-state money, paid lobbyists? What type of forum would you present in order to have a conversation about this? Or should this be strictly limited to the legislature? And I ask not knowing the answer.
Pat, there would be no situation where I could imagine, if I were elected Attorney General, that I would be meeting with lobbyist groups, because I don't make the law. It's not my job to make the law. It's not my job to make the policy. And it would, not only that, it would look like they were trying to influence the way I would be enforcing the law, which is the job of the Attorney General. That should be, if they want to have lobbyists at the State House, the governor wants to have lobbyists, lobby him on his behalf, that's where it could belong. I'm no big fan of lobbyists on either side. I'm not a big political guy, if you want to say it, but I don't see any role for the Attorney General involving himself with getting in talks with lobbyists.
Isn't the role of the legislature to enact laws, depending on which house they are participating in?
Yes, it's here in Rhode Island, it's the General Assembly. It's the General Assembly, and then if they pass the bill in both houses of the General Assembly, it goes to the governor's desk for either a signature or a veto, or at some period of time, it passes into law if he does nothing. So that's how it works. That's how the lawmaking process works. The Attorney General plays no role in that. Certainly he's going to, if he thinks that there's a law that he could use that would help his office accomplish the mission of that office, which is to do justice and the right thing at all times, that's certainly something he could request that the General Assembly consider. But Attorney General Noronha seems to have confused his role with that of a legislator or potentially the governor, and perhaps that's where he's heading. I don't know. He hasn't said it one way or the other. But you ask me, he's acting more like a candidate for governor than he is the Attorney General at this point.
And doesn't that
Well, that's
redefine
what yesterday's rally was. Yesterday's rally was the who's in the governor's race. That's all that was. They're grandstanding on our Second Amendment rights. That's what they're doing. They're pandering for votes up there. And they had the full slate of them up there working it yesterday. It's just okay. So did you see the Journal where Linda Finn is got cited for not filing any of her lobby reports and then refused to pay the fine? And there she is with Nellie Gourvet up there, who's claiming that she's cleaning up the lobbying rolls. Like how, how bizarre is that?
How in your face does it actually have to get before people in Rhode Island finally say we've had enough of this nonsense? Just this bizarre nonsense, this just blatant lying to our faces. How bad does it have to get? I honestly don't know.
Well,
no, I just was a little dumbfounded by that after. I'm here they are together, and here they are fighting over Linda Finn, not wanting to file her reports and pay all her penalties for late filings. It's like, it just gets more, some days is just more bizarre than the others.
well, we always harken back, since we're fans here in the show, in the studio, of 1960s and 1970s television, and possibly, if you've listened to the show before, you've heard me use this analogy. There was a great skit on the Carol Burnett show. Yes, I'm dating myself. A wonderful variety show back when there were variety shows. And she would do a parody of a soap opera. And I guess my final thought for the evening was the parody was called As the Stomach Turns. And so yesterday was truly an episode as we watched the state's treasurer pander as the stomach turns, as we watched the Secretary of State. All of these, particularly the Attorney General and the Secretaries of State's offices, are ultimately apolitical offices. One is, if you will, the legal guardian of the state's voting rights, privileges, rules, laws, databases. And the other one is, Mr. Calenda, as you mentioned so eloquently, the people's attorney. Why they would think it's appropriate to immerse themselves in the body politic is beyond me. In anything other than their own elections, and until such time they remove themselves from that office, they should be entirely apolitical.
I think I can answer your question on Nellie, because the reason she's pandering to Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence and that crew is because now they've also merged into a Rhode Island voters group. So now
Wow.
Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence is Rhode Island Values Project, Planned Parenthood, and the Rhode Island Voters League. So that's why, because now you see, now that they keep making these little entities, they can funnel more money to these candidates.
Yep.
There it is, right there, Brenda.
And I can prove it because I have the reports to prove it. All of this little money circle they got going on. So it's not about the kids. It's not about safety. It's all about the money.
We've got a new producer here in the studio. Great young man. We were discussing today that sadly we can't use sound effects. I believe the song. I'm about to really embarrass myself. How does the song go? Whoop! There it is. Whoop! There it is.
There it is.
So, yeah, I wish. I guess my rendition of that now will have to pass since we're not allowed to play music here on video. Oh man. Well, again, big day. Let's go over tomorrow's specifics. What time should people expect to show up?
Anytime after 3. We have people that are going to get there to set up around 2 o'clock, but we figured anytime after 3 people can come. come and go if they can, even if it's just for a few minutes to stop in, that's fine too. If they want to come after work, we'll be there till about 7.
All right.
And we'll just make a good showing. That's all.
Recommended things to bring besides water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A big bladder because we're still working on getting into figuring out the bathroom scenario. Although I have got people have been calling their legislators and telling them what's happening and telling them that they can't believe that they're going to be locked out of the state house and not be allowed to use the bathrooms. So I don't know where that's going to go.
That's the people's house. That's utterly offensive to someone who has, like me, who has sworn to uphold the laws of the state and sworn to uphold the Constitution of the state. That is an utterly offensive notion that the people do not have access to their house.
Well, there is. I'll let it out. There is a hotel across the street, and you just need walk into the lobby and go downstairs a level. There are no bathrooms. As a public service, I'm providing this, and of course, for the fine people at said hotel, you can thank me tomorrow. But one need only go downstairs in said hotel, and there's a lovely set of facilities, both for men and women, and you can do what you need to do. And I would recommend it'd be kind of cool if everybody showed up at once. But hey, that's just me.
But well, that's what we're hoping. But I got to leave it open to the people that are working.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
But I think we'll have a good showing.
Excellent. Chas, sometimes I forget this show is yours. Take it away.
Well, I really, Brenda, thank you so much for coming on and giving everybody the information we need to make sure that we're protecting our rights, not only tomorrow, but going on in the future, because we know no matter how this ends, this legislative session, this is going to come back every single year as we have these people in the General Assembly, and apparently our general officers who are supposed to be nonpartisan, but they are out there touting these bills. So I appreciate all the work you've done. And of course, Pat, I always appreciate the conversation and the inquisitive questions that you pose here, to not only to me, but to our community at large. Particularly, I appreciated your questions to the Attorney General yesterday, although he did not seem to want to answer them. And I appreciate your contributions here on Chas Calenda, Attorney at Law. And for those of you looking to reach me, again, I work at the law firm of Inman and Torgy, which is in Coventry. You can reach me at 401-823-9200. And as Pat and I talked about, I am a candidate to be the Attorney General in 2022. And if I am elected, I promise that I will put the law above politics. So that will do it for our episode of Chas Calenda, Attorney at Law. And I will see everybody back on the next Wednesday in the next episode, where we will continue our discussion of the Rhode Island landscape of laws and politics as it go forward. Thank you. And